Michael Turner survived 7 bullets in his own driveway, but what he discovered after waking up was even more deadly than the attack itself. Claire Turner looked like a grieving wife at the hospital, but beneath her tears hid a secret that would shatter everything Michael believed. Daniel Ross was supposed to be just an affair, but his obsession turned into a plan for murder that spun completely out of control. Michael Turner walked out of the hospital alive, but he didn't return home as the same man. He returned with a fury that could not be contained. Claire and Daniel thought the story would end with Michael's death, but the true ending was far darker than either of them imagined. Michael Turner was the kind of man people described as steady, dependable, and almost too good to be true. He worked long hours as an insurance adjuster, a job that demanded patience and precision, and he carried those same qualities into his personal life. Neighbors on the quiet suburban street where he lived with his wife often waved at him as he mowed the lawn on weekends or carried groceries into the house. He was the type who remembered birthdays, who volunteered for community fundraisers, who never forgot to shovel snow from the sidewalk so no one slipped. To anyone who only saw the surface, his life was the picture of stability. He had worked his way up from nothing, carefully building a career, buying a home, and marrying a woman who seemed to complete the picture. Claire Turner was striking. Tall, graceful, with a soft voice that could easily charm strangers, she often drew attention at neighborhood gatherings. Where Michael was serious and steady, she was playful and restless. She enjoyed the spotlight in ways Michael never did, preferring to draw others into conversation while he stood in the background, listening quietly. Their pairing seemed balanced, her energy softening his intensity, his reliability grounding her whims. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. Behind closed doors, though, the cracks had begun to show. Michael's long hours at work, though financially rewarding, left Claire feeling neglected. The predictable routines that comforted him felt suffocating to her. Their evenings often slipped into silence, Michael absorbed in paperwork or television, while Claire scrolled endlessly on her phone, craving a thrill she couldn't quite put into words. Over time, she began to drift emotionally, and the warmth that had once defined their marriage cooled into something distant and polite. It was during one of those lonely stretches that Daniel Ross entered her life. Daniel wasn't like Michael. He was unpredictable, the kind of man who lived in the moment without worrying about consequences. He worked sporadically, never holding down a stable career, but he carried himself with a confidence that drew Claire in. He was reckless, bold, and thrilling in a way her husband never could be. What began as casual encounters soon spiraled into a full-fledged affair. Claire told herself it was temporary, a way to fill the emptiness she felt. But Daniel fed her the kind of attention she longed for. With him, she felt desired and alive. Daniel, however, wasn't content with being a secret. He grew impatient with Claire's hesitation, constantly pressing her about why she stayed in a marriage that seemed loveless. At first, she brushed him off, insisting she couldn't just walk away. But the more she wavered, the more insistent Daniel became. He despised Michael without ever having met him, resenting the role he played in keeping Claire out of reach. He began to talk not just about leaving Michael, but about eliminating him altogether. Claire recoiled when Daniel first hinted at it. She insisted that wasn't what she wanted, that divorce might be an option someday, that things were complicated. But Daniel didn't back down. He painted vivid pictures of a future where they could be together openly, free of the constraints and lies. He framed Michael as the obstacle standing between them and happiness. What started as whispers turned into arguments, with Daniel accusing Claire of cowardice whenever she resisted. For Claire, the affair became a dangerous trap. She wanted the thrill Daniel gave her, but she also wanted the safety and stability Michael provided. She told herself she could manage both worlds, balancing the risk with secrecy. But she underestimated how much control Daniel had over her now. He had become possessive, unpredictable, and more dangerous with each passing week. The excitement she once felt in his presence began to twist into fear, though she kept returning to him, unable or unwilling to break the cycle. Michael noticed the changes in his wife, but he chalked them up to stress. He told himself she was tired, that perhaps she was going through a phase. He never imagined another man was involved, and the idea of betrayal never crossed his mind. To him, Claire was still the woman he had vowed to love and protect. and he trusted her completely. That trust blinded him to the warning signs, leaving him vulnerable in ways he couldn't comprehend. As the weeks slipped by, the quiet suburban home that looked so perfect from the outside became a stage for a growing storm. Claire smiled at Michael across dinner tables, laughed politely at neighbors' jokes, and carried herself as though nothing was wrong, all while her secret life spun further out of control. Daniel's influence tightened around her like a noose, and the thought that Michael might one day discover the truth only added to her anxiety. What no one knew was that a plan was already forming, one that would soon shatter the illusion of perfection that surrounded Michael's life. The cracks behind closed doors were widening into something far more dangerous, and the man who seemed untouchable was about to face the darkest betrayal of all. Michael Turner never saw the danger coming. On that particular evening, the quiet rhythm of his routine felt no different than any other day. He left work later than usual, the office lights dim as he gathered his papers and tucked them neatly into his worn leather briefcase. The roads were nearly empty as he drove back through familiar streets, radio murmuring faintly in the background. The neighborhood where he lived had always given him a sense of comfort. It was lined with tidy lawns and flickering porch lights, a place where children rode bicycles in the afternoon and families waved to each other across driveways. To Michael, it was the symbol of everything he had worked hard to build: peace, order, safety. What he did not know was that safety had already been ripped from his life. Claire had spoken to Daniel earlier that day. Her voice trembled as she told him she couldn't go through with it, that everything had gone too far. But Daniel was already set on what he believed had to be done. In his mind, Michael's existence was the wall blocking their future. He had watched Michael's routines for weeks, studying when he left, when he returned, and how little he seemed to notice his surroundings. Tonight, Daniel crouched in the shadows near the Turners' driveway, his heart racing, his hands gripping cold steel. The sound of Michael's car pulling in sent a jolt through him. The headlights briefly illuminated the neat rows of hedges, the garage door reflecting the beams before fading back into darkness. Michael parked with the same precision he always did, turning off the engine and letting the silence settle. He reached for his briefcase, already thinking about dinner and the comfort of home. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of cut grass and damp pavement. It should have been an ordinary night, unremarkable, forgettable. Instead, it became the moment his life splintered into before and after. As Michael opened the door and swung his legs out, the first shot rang out. It cracked through the stillness, louder than thunder, striking him squarely in the shoulder. His briefcase tumbled to the ground, papers scattering across the driveway. Shock froze him in place for a split second before the next shots followed, rapid and merciless. Each impact tore through his body, sending him crashing onto the concrete. He felt the air ripped from his lungs, the warmth of blood spreading beneath him. 7 shots in total, everyone meant to end him. The shooter didn't stay to watch. Daniel bolted into the darkness, his footsteps fading quickly as he vanished into the night. For a moment, there was only silence again, broken only by Michael's shallow, ragged gasps. He lay sprawled across his driveway, his mind flickering in and out of consciousness, his body refusing to obey his desperate will to move. The world around him blurred into fragments, the porch light glowing faintly above, the muffled sounds of a television playing in a nearby house, the metallic tang of blood filling his mouth. Neighbors rushed out when the gunfire reached their ears. Doors flew open, voices shouted, and within minutes the street was alive with panic. Someone screamed Michael's name. Another dialed emergency services with trembling hands. The sight of him on the ground, riddled with bullets, left them stunned. No one could comprehend how such violence had struck in their quiet community. The ambulance arrived quickly, its red lights washing over the scene as paramedics worked furiously to stabilize him. They cut away his shirt, revealing the devastation of 7 wounds. His pulse was weak, his breathing shallow, but it was still there, a flicker of life where none should have remained. They lifted him onto the stretcher, rushing him inside the vehicle as the sirens wailed into the night. At the hospital, doctors prepared for the impossible. They fought to stop the bleeding, their hands moving with practiced urgency. Hours stretched into the early morning as surgeons worked to save what little remained of Michael's battered body. His condition was dire. The bullets had torn through flesh, muscle, and bone, leaving a trail of destruction few could have survived. When the operation ended, Michael slipped into a coma, machines now doing the work his body could not. News of the shooting spread rapidly through the town. Friends, neighbors, and co-workers spoke in disbelief, struggling to understand how a man like Michael had become the target of such ruthless violence. Reporters gathered outside the hospital, cameras flashing, while whispers filled the air about possible motives. Many speculated it was a robbery gone wrong, though nothing had been taken. The randomness of it unsettled everyone, fueling rumors and fear. Claire appeared devastated, her tears convincing to those around her. She clutched tissues in trembling hands as she sat in the hospital waiting room, telling anyone who asked that she couldn't understand why someone would want to hurt her husband. Outwardly, she was the picture of a grieving spouse. Inwardly, she battled panic. She had hoped, even begged, that Daniel would not follow through, but now the reality was undeniable. The secret she had been carrying had just exploded into violence, and she feared what would happen if Michael ever woke to tell the truth. The investigation began immediately. Detectives combed through the neighborhood, questioning witnesses, analyzing shell casings, and reviewing security cameras from nearby houses. The attack's precision raised doubts about it being random. Whoever pulled the trigger knew Michael's routine, knew where he would be, and waited for the right moment. As suspicion grew, attention inevitably turned toward those closest to him. Michael's life now hung in a fragile balance. Doctors warned the family his chances were slim, that even if he survived, recovery would be long and uncertain. But what no one expected was that beneath the coma, beneath the broken body stitched together in a hospital bed, Michael's mind still carried fragments of that night. Fragments that, if ever recalled, would unravel the truth behind the betrayal. The weeks after the shooting blurred into one long stretch of uncertainty. Machines hummed steadily in Michael Turner's hospital room, each one keeping him alive while his body fought to recover. Nurses moved in and out, adjusting 4 lines, checking monitors, whispering updates to doctors who studied his chart with guarded expressions. To those watching from the outside, Michael seemed lost in another world, his eyes closed, his face pale, his body still. But inside his mind, fragments of that night drifted back and forth like broken glass scattered on a floor. He saw flashes of light, felt the sharp sting of bullets, and in fleeting moments of awareness, he remembered the shadow of someone standing just beyond the reach of his vision. His family gathered often, keeping vigil by his bedside. Neighbors, who once waved at him across lawns, now whispered prayers in the hospital chapel. To them, he was a victim of senseless violence, a man who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But to Claire, the days dragged with a different kind of weight. Every time she sat in that room, pretending to grieve and waiting for updates, she was haunted by the possibility that Michael might eventually open his eyes. She lived in constant fear that the truth, the one she had hidden so carefully, would spill out the moment he could speak. Doctors warned that recovery, if it happened at all, would be long. Yet slowly, against all odds, Michael's body began to respond. His fingers twitched, his eyelids fluttered, and eventually, after weeks of stillness, his eyes opened. The staff called it a miracle. They surrounded him, asking him to follow lights, to respond with movements, to hold on as his body tried to rebuild itself. Michael struggled, but he complied, each small action a victory. His body was weak, riddled with scars and pain, but his mind was sharper than anyone suspected. As he became more alert, memories of the night surfaced in fragments. He remembered stepping out of his car, the sharp crack of a gunshot, the searing heat in his shoulder. He remembered falling, gasping, trying to crawl toward the safety of his porch before the world went black. And most of all, he remembered the figure in the shadows. Though his mind couldn't yet provide a clear face, the certainty inside him grew. This wasn't random. Someone had planned this, someone who knew him. Detectives soon arrived at his bedside, eager for answers. They asked if he remembered anything, if he had enemies, if he could describe what happened. Michael spoke with effort, his voice weak, but determined. He told them it wasn't a burglary, that nothing had been stolen, that the shooter had been waiting for him. He couldn't yet name the man, but he was sure it was personal. His words gave investigators a new direction, pushing them to look deeper into his life. Meanwhile, Claire's nerves frayed. She tried to maintain her mask of loyalty, sitting beside him, adjusting his blankets, whispering encouragements to anyone within earshot. But when she was alone, her hands trembled. Every improvement in Michael's condition brought her closer to exposure. Daniel called her constantly, demanding updates, pressuring her to reassure him that Michael would not survive. But Michael's survival was undeniable now, and with it, the risk that their secret would be revealed that AS days turned into weeks. Michael began piecing together the betrayal. He replayed memories of Claire's sudden distance, her secretive phone calls, her unexplained absences. The puzzle that once made no sense was slowly forming a picture he could not ignore. When detectives mentioned they were investigating people close to him, something inside Michael hardened. He knew where the truth was pointing. He had trusted Claire completely, but now every instinct screamed that she had been part of it. Physically, progress came slowly. He learned to sit upright again, to take cautious steps down hospital hallways, each movement an act of determination. He endured endless therapy sessions, pushing through pain, driven by something stronger than recovery alone. It wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about confronting what had been done to him that night, when the hospital halls grew quiet, and the hum of machines was the only sound. Michael's thoughts darkened. He imagined the shadowed figure raising the gun, imagined Claire whispering words of affection to another man, imagined the betrayal carved into every wound on his body. Anger grew inside him, deeper and sharper than any pain he had felt. He realized that surviving the bullets wasn't enough. He couldn't just return to life as it had been, not with the knowledge of what really lurked beneath the surface of his so-called perfect marriage. By the time doctors declared him stable enough to leave intensive care, Michael was no longer the man he had been before. He was changed, scarred, but also fueled by a determination no one around him could see. The community celebrated his recovery, neighbors dropping off meals and cards, reporters calling him a miracle. But beneath his polite gratitude, he carried a secret vow. He would find out the full truth of what had been planned against him, and when he did, there would be no forgiveness. Survival had given him a second chance at life, but it had also awakened a fury that would not be quieted. Michael Turner's release from the hospital was marked as a triumph. Cameras flashed outside the sliding doors, neighbors waved, and reporters shouted questions about his recovery. To the world, he was a miracle, a man who had taken 7 bullets and somehow defied death. He smiled faintly as he was wheeled to the car, nodded politely to well-wishers, and thanked the medical staff who had kept him alive. But behind the tired smile, his thoughts were focused elsewhere. The man everyone saw as a survivor was already planning what came next. The weeks in recovery had changed him. He no longer felt like the same steady, trusting man who once believed his life was untouchable. He had seen betrayal up close, felt it burn into his skin, and now every step outside the hospital walls was guided by suspicion. He returned to his home on that quiet suburban street, the same place where he had collapsed in his own blood, but it no longer felt like a sanctuary. The driveway where the bullets had torn into him was now a scar on the landscape, a daily reminder that someone had waited for him in the shadows. Detectives were still piecing together the investigation, and their interest in Claire had grown sharper. Phone records revealed late-night calls with Daniel Ross, a man they quickly identified as someone with no reason to be in Michael's orbit. Surveillance footage from nearby homes showed a vehicle matching Daniel's parked in the neighborhood on the night of the attack. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough to raise questions. Claire, however, continued to present herself as a grieving, loyal wife. She visited Michael in the hospital, she spoke kindly to neighbors, and she pretended to know nothing. But cracks had begun to show in her performance. Her nerves were thin, her explanations vague. Michael noticed all of it. He watched her closely now, the way she shifted in her chair when detectives mentioned Daniel's name, the way her phone was always face down on the table, the way her eyes avoided his when conversations drifted too close to the truth. He never confronted her directly, not yet. Instead, he listened, observed, and began piecing together the betrayal with quiet precision. Rehabilitation demanded much of his time, but even during therapy sessions, His mind circled the mystery of how deep the plot against him had gone. His steps grew steadier, his strength returned, and with it, his determination solidified. He told himself that justice would come, but he wasn't convinced the legal system would move fast enough. He had learned the hard way that waiting and trusting could be fatal. Late at night, he began to move through the house with a notebook, writing down what he remembered, organizing scraps of information. He noted the days Claire had disappeared. For hours, the phone calls she took in whispers, the times she returned home with excuses that didn't quite fit. He replayed every detail of that night, the car pulling in, the shadow moving toward him, the sound of the gun. The more he wrote, the clearer the picture became. It was no random attacker. It was someone who knew his life, his schedule, his patterns. Detectives returned with more questions, pressing Claire harder each time. Michael listened carefully as she answered them, and though her words sounded convincing, he caught the hesitation underneath. Each careful lie confirmed what his instincts already screamed. She wasn't a bystander. She was part of it. Neighbors whispered now when they saw Claire outside. Rumors spread quickly in quiet communities, and the story of Michael's shooting had given them plenty to speculate about. Whispers of an affair began to circulate, fragments of truth that made Claire's facade harder to maintain. She avoided eye contact, avoided gatherings, avoided anything that might expose the truth. Michael, however, did the opposite. He leaned into the attention, smiling when neighbors greeted him, offering polite thanks when they mentioned his miracle. Survival. The more normal he appeared, the more Claire believed he still trusted her. It was a mask he wore well, a mask that gave him time. Daniel, meanwhile, grew desperate. Michael had survived, the investigation was circling him, and Claire was slipping from his control. He called her constantly, urging her to meet him, pressuring her to keep quiet. His impatience leaked into recklessness, and soon he was spotted near her workplace, caught lingering too close to the Turner home. Police noted the sightings, adding weight to their suspicions. Michael read the reports and felt the fire inside him grow hotter. Every night, as he lay awake in the bed he once shared with Claire, he replayed the betrayal. The thought of her conspiring with another man, of them planning his death while he worked to provide for her, twisted something deep. Inside him, survival alone was no longer enough. He wanted truth, but he also wanted retribution. The law might take its time, bound by procedures and evidence, but Michael was no longer patient. He had spent too long in hospital beds, too long stitched together by machines, too long trusting people who had betrayed him. It'd be why the time autumn leaves began to fall in his neighborhood, Michael's decision was made. He would not wait for justice to stumble toward him. He would find Daniel. He would uncover the full truth of Claire's betrayal, and he would make sure neither of them walked away untouched. To the world, he remained the miracle survivor, a man blessed with a second chance at life. But in the quiet moments when no one was watching, his eyes burned with something darker, something colder. The survivor was preparing to become something else entirely the night Michael Turner vanished. From his home, there were no signs of struggle, no hurried notes, no explanation left behind. His neighbors assumed he had taken a drive to clear his head, maybe even gone to stay with family for a while. After all, the trauma of surviving 7 bullets would weigh heavily on anyone. But Michael had not left for peace or rest. He left with a plan, one that had been building silently from the moment his eyes first opened in that hospital bed. He had been patient, he had watched carefully, and now, at last, it was time to act. Claire's routine was easy to predict. She still worked her part-time shifts at a local boutique, still returned home in the evenings, still answered calls from Daniel in hushed tones. Michael had listened from the shadows of their home, pretending to sleep or keeping his head turned away, memorizing every word that slipped from her mouth. He had no doubt anymore about her betrayal. The woman he had loved, the one he had sacrificed for, had chosen another man and conspired in his death. The thought of her smiling at him across dinner tables while secretly planning his murder ignited a rage he could no longer contain. Daniel was reckless enough to make himself visible. He called Claire constantly, demanded meetings, and sometimes waited in his car at the edge of her street. Michael began tracking him quietly, following him at a distance, watching him slink into rundown bars or park his car near abandoned lots. Daniel was bold when he thought Michael was gone. But he had no idea the man he tried to kill was still alive, stronger than ever, and closing in the woods outside town, away from the eyes of neighbors and police. Michael found the place where he would end it. An old hunting cabin stood in silence, abandoned for years, its windows broken and its roof sagging. It was the perfect place to bring them both, the perfect stage for the truth to be revealed. He prepared it methodically, cleaning out space, making sure no one would stumble upon it. Each step he took was deliberate, his focus sharper than it had ever been. Claire's disappearance came first. One evening after work, she drove her car down a quiet rural road, expecting to meet Daniel in secret. Instead, Michael was waiting. The confrontation was quick, silent, and final. He brought her to the cabin, her car left abandoned on the roadside. Another breadcrumb for police to follow. Days later, Daniel's turn came. Reckless as always, he followed Claire's instructions to meet him late at night, unaware that Michael had already set the trap. When Daniel stepped inside the cabin, the confrontation erupted in violence. To Michael, it wasn't enough to pull a trigger or strike a single blow. He wanted Daniel to feel the fear, the helplessness, the certainty of death closing in, the very things Michael had felt that night in his driveway. When it was over, Daniel's body was left deep in the woods, the marks of Michael's rage etched clearly into his flesh. Claire's end came swiftly after. The betrayal burned deeper than any bullet wound, and Michael delivered his judgment without hesitation. Her body, too, was hidden away near the cabin, the place where their secrets had unraveled. To Michael, it was not just punishment, it was balance restored. The police search stretched for days, combing through rural roads and wooded paths. They found Claire's abandoned car first, a chilling clue that suggested foul play. Soon after, they discovered Daniel's remains, and finally, Claire's body, each one tied unmistakably to a brutal hand. The brutality told its own story. This was not random violence. This was personal. Investigators knew immediately that Michael was at the center of it. The survivor of 7 bullets had turned into something far more dangerous, but Michael was gone. He had vanished without a trace, leaving no sign of where he had gone or how far he had fled. Some believed he had crossed state lines, starting a new life under a different name. Others whispered that he hadn't gone far at all, that he was still out there, watching quietly, hidden in plain sight. His disappearance only fueled the mystery, leaving police scrambling for leads and the community gripped by fear. The story of Michael Turner spread quickly, picked up by national outlets, retold as both miracle and horror. To some, he was a man, driven beyond his limits, a victim who had been betrayed and left for dead, only to rise and deliver justice with his own hands. To others, he was a criminal who had allowed his fury to consume him, crossing the line from survivor to predator. The debate raged, but Michael himself remained silent, his whereabouts unknown. The driveway where he had once fallen became a place of grim fascination, neighbors pointing it out to visitors as the spot where it all began. The house where he and Claire had lived was eventually sold, but whispers lingered in the neighborhood for years. People said you could still feel the weight of what had happened there, the way betrayal and vengeance had destroyed the illusion of safety on a quiet suburban street. In the end, Michael's story became more than just a crime. It became a warning. It showed how betrayal could twist love into hatred, how survival could awaken something far darker than gratitude, and how one man's fight to live could transform into a relentless hunger for revenge. 7 bullets had failed to kill him, but the betrayal of his wife had done something even more powerful. It had remade him. And somewhere, out in the world, the man who had once been seen as a miracle survivor was still out there, carrying the weight of both victim and executioner.